Hey everyone. I'm Connor. This is the first time I'm ever recording a video, so I hope it goes well. But essentially, what I'm going to be doing today is sculpting a rock, and you're kind of going to follow along with me or just watch me do it. So I've got a little bit of ref here. We've got this little guy. He looks pretty cool. So I'm just going to have him on another monitor. I'll go for something pretty close to him. I'm not too worried for this video about hitting it one to one. Sometimes you would want to hit something one to one, but not today. Not today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of going to look at the reference and see what's going on, and then what I'm going to do is going to start moving some bits about. So what I see is we're getting some pretty pretty nice organic forms on this little guy. So again, I'm just going to start moving some stuff around, trying to match what I see going on in the ref. And at this point, like I don't really mind being a bit messy. We're at a low resolution. You know, we can just smooth it down and can always like just plane it back up with one of our brushes in a bit. So in fact, let's just smooth this guy all the way down. We don't mind. Blip, 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 blip. At this point, let's dynamesh him. Right, cool. Let's just give ourselves a little bit of a blob like this. This is super workable. And I kind of see like a big line, and then a big face here. So it's probably going to be good to cut that in. So I'm going to use the trim smooth board brush. And if you don't have that open, if you go into your light box and brush, and then trim smooth board down here, stick a square alpha on that guy. And what we want to do right now is be pretty heavy handed. We just want to knock some stuff in. So knock, 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 knock. And really, at this point, all I care is about these big planes, these big faces that I want the rock to kind of adhere to. And we kind of want to match the angles that the rock does as well. So I'm noticing some big planes here, big planes here. And at this resolution, we shouldn't be afraid to squish, pull, go back in with our move brush, maybe mask something, pull it around. I've noticed it's got like kind of this nice up angle on one side, so we're actually higher on this side. Something like that, right? Yeah. And yes, we're gonna squish this back down. If you got the move brush and you hold Alt and just like pull or push, it's gonna take the almost like the normal of that face or plane and push and pull it that way. So that's a useful trick for anyone to use. And again, don't be afraid to be pretty heavy-handed. I'm just going to knock stuff about, push it around. I'm going to go back to our trim brush now. And again, just boop, 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 boop. And really, these big, heavy faces, we just want to kind of get right, because if we get these right, it's going to make the rest of the job super smooth, or you'd hope so. We hope so. Um, that's what I tell myself anyway. And with the trim smooth border brush, obviously, when you're using it normally, you're knocking stuff in, you're knocking stuff around, and you can also hold Alt, right? And if you hold Alt, it's going to do the inverse of that. It's going to knock stuff out, which is super good for just getting these nice kind of, pop out bits. And once you've done that, you can go in here and cut around it and stuff, and you start to get some of this nice edging. Again, because we're at a super low resolution, I'm not going to play around with that stuff too much right now. I'm just going to really care about its general silhouette and how that's kind of working. So again, getting this right is really important. So I am going to spend just a little bit of time doing this. And I urge not to rush. And in general, if you're new to ZBrush, I'd urge you to just get used to the UI, figure out where buttons are, figure out what you like to use. Do experiment. There's a lot of crazy cool tools in ZBrush. Honestly, I don't use too many of them, but I'm not a character artist. And honestly, you don't really need too much to be doing some cool environment art with ZBrush. You just need to know like a select few brushes, select few buttons, and some general workflow practices. So I'm actually feeling pretty good about where we're at with this rock. And again, I'm just pretty much using trim smooth border, and I'm going to just re-dynamesh at this point. And I'm noticing this face needs to be caked in a bit. So pew, 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 pop this guy in. Wonderful. And I'm also noticing in the ref, we come to a bit more of a point here than I'm at. So I'm just gonna pull these guys in. And I also notice there's a big old chunk coming out the top of this, and there's quite a few ways to do that. An easy one would be to just use a trim smooth border, start knocking this down. And sometimes, just sometimes, you might not have the resolution, in my case, to do that, but I feel like we're close enough there. And I think at this point, let's see if we've got another kind of chunk down here. So see if we can chunk that out quickly. Something like that. Yeah, it's a bit further back in the reference. So we go chunk something in. And again, we might lose some of this, but for now it's just holding shapes. And I'm just actually, this planar face is a bit too sharp. So as you can see, I'm kind of battling with the trim smooth border brush at this resolution, try and get some results, but you can also use something like the clay tubes brush, so BCB. That's brush clay buildup. Brush clay tubes. Oh, I'm falling over my words. Is BCT, and again, learning the hotkeys is super useful. And you can see what I'm doing here is every stroke, I'm just kind of getting a nice layer in, and I can kind of follow some forms. At this point, I'm looking at the reference and I'm thinking, hey, we're pretty close. I'm just going to pull some of this back up again with clay tubes. And I can't see the back of the reference or the underside, so I'm kind of just going to have to experiment that, but knowing what's going on the rest of the rock, it doesn't hurt to just kind of guesstimate what's going on. We're probably going to have a bit more of a chunk somewhere, so let's cut that guy in down there. That feels like it should work. And maybe let's just take off this back corner as well. And again, trial and error, knock some stuff about, knock some stuff in, see what you like, what you don't like. It's all part of the process. And when I'm happy with something like this per se, let's res up. So go to Dynamesh. I'm just gonna guesstimate about that 41K, not too bad. And this is going to give us a good framework now to build off. And if you go too high too quickly, you'll start to see that your shapes are super lumpy. It's a pretty common issue I see in a lot of ZBrush sculpts is people go too high res too quickly. So I'd always just recommend just stick to a lower res. Just accept it. It might look blobby now, but it'll look beautiful in the future. And what I'm going to do now is just, again, with the trim smooth border brush, just reform some of this stuff. And it's not a race when you're doing stuff like this. You don't want to be rapido. It's more just figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what's the ref doing, what's the ref not doing. And like I said, I'm not going to use too many brushes on this guy. Don't feel like you need a lot of brushes to make a decent looking rock. I'll show you some tips and tricks as I go. Some that I don't use all the time, some that I do. But again, I'm just going to see what the ref is doing. I'm going to probably remesh a few times as I do this process, just to ensure that I've got some resolution to work with. So I will start popping some more shapes out as well, just as I'm looking at the planes and stuff. So, and again, you can be a bit sloppy, like at this stage, like these edges and stuff, you can polish those up later. And if anything, they give your rock a little bit more character and you'll kind of look a little bit like, some wear and tear. So at this point, I'm just kind of feeling around, seeing what is going on. And again, just seeing in the ref, there's kind of nice bits of edging going on. So I'm trying to lay the framework for that. There's a really useful thing you can do with a planar brush where you can kind of like cut in and follow a form around. So I'm just going to leave some framework for that type of stuff in a bit when we come to it. And I'm just gonna go and I don't want to make this video too long, right? Because it's my first one, and again, I don't even know if it's going to be good for anyone. So this is just me kind of trying to give back to the community. Because when I was learning art and practicing, like videos on YouTube and wherever else was super like the foundation really for me learning a lot of the stuff that I know now. So hopefully this helps someone. And if it does, let me know. If it doesn't, also let me know. Let me know what I could do better next time if I come to make another one. Um, but you can kind of see like what's going on now. We're getting some nice forms, and again, like when it comes to these type of forms, right? We want to take our brush and we don't want to rush this. We want to like kind of just chunk it down, and that way you kind of get these supernatural forms. And again, because it's not a race, we can Control Z, and again, like getting some super nice edging, and I'm getting some not so nice stuff down here. So we're just gonna go in there and beat that guy up a bit. So all in all, it's getting there, right? So I'm gonna try and speed the rest of this super fast. Again, still trim smooth border, God brush, please use it. It is a lifesaver for many things. And I'll give you a trick. So there's a tool in Zbrush called Picker. So you can find it up here. So the Picker guy, I've got it on my hotkeys. Sorry, my custom UI here. So what this actually does is it changes your orientation of your brush. So when you're doing stuff like this, I can just like pull my picker down, right? And what that's going to do is pretend my pen is like pointing at a downward angle. So I can like, oh yeah, look at that. We love that type of stuff. So you can get this super nice kind of cracking and stuff like that, super easy with this guy. And again, you can pull it up, sideways up, like it's a full little spinny gizmo. So whatever angle you've got it at, you can get some super nice stuff like this. And then just to reset it, you hit the once Ori button, and that'll just revert your orientation to whatever it was, right? So that's a super useful trick. I use that a little bit. I wouldn't say I use it too often, but for sometimes when you get like geology that's got that super heavy like kind of cracking and lines, like it is a bit of a lifesaver. But you can also do that numerous other ways, and I think that's the really good thing about ZBrush is like every artist probably has a different way of doing something, and I think that just goes to show the power of the software in general. Like there's not just a one fix solution to anything. So um, unless you're decimating, then I think everyone decimates assets the same way because the decimation tool in ZBrush is goated. Again, so I'm still at a pretty low res. I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm just gonna speed run some of this stuff now. I'm just gonna knock, 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 and again, I'm not worried. I'm gonna go in and out a bit with Alt just to pull some stuff around, and it's good to do that just so you get these super kind of blocky forms and almost like crumpled paper to a degree. So cool, cool, cool. And one thing again, always watch out for super straight lines like this, and try and do something fancy. Again, take your time. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy. But it's just about making stuff feel a bit more natural. I actually quite like, let's knock that corner out. Yeah. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So we've got something like this. One thing I don't like is this plane, how it's so kind of straight. So let's just knock that guy. It's a little bit against the reference, but it's also not too far away the reference, so I don't actually mind that. Cool. And again, we've got some more straight lines going on here, so let's just get rid of these guys. But yeah, just gonna do that. Cool. I don't know if that's better or worse at this point, but again, speed run time. And I'm just gonna remesh again just so I have some more resolution up here. Cool. Lovely. We like what we see, kind of. There's still some room for improvement. And again, I'm just gonna emphasize this so many times. Make sure your rock or whatever you're sculpting is looking good at its blobby stage, because the last thing you want to do is go super high poly, put all this detail in, and then you realize that you either need to change something or something else ain't that great, because that's when it becomes a bit of a pain to walk back. Cool. So, right, here's a cool. My headset just died, so I had to plug it. Cool part, right? So we've kind of got something like this. It's a bit scraggly at the back, but it's okay. Um, and now what we're going to do is we can either do two things, right? We can either Dynamesh at a higher resolution, which is absolutely fine. Like we can see our wireframe here. We got enough bits to play around with here. Or we could Z-remesh and start subdividing our way up. So it's completely down to personal preference and how you're working. So for example, if I was to duplicate this guy, hide the top guy, go to geometry, go to Z-remesher. So we probably want it the same, right? So tap same, hit Z-remesh, wait for it to load. And it's going to think about what it's doing. And then when it's done, sorry, just need to clear my throat. We have this super nice topology now that kind of flows with our forms. One thing that's good for is just it kind of, when you subdivide up, it's trying to pretty much pack all that topology into the relevant forms. Dynamesh is more of kind of just like a straight quad fill across your mesh, which is very good when you're pulling shapes apart and you want to, experiment with forms and stuff. So again, it's completely up to personal preference. For this, I am probably just going to stick with Dynamesh, just because it is quicker. So one thing I'm seeing with my rock right now is, we're kind of feeling like a rock, which is great, right? This is kind of our journey. Now there's two brushes now that we can look at using. So I think I mentioned before the planar brush. So again, I throw a square alpha on this. Planar brush is super good for just kind of like chunking in stuff and like, you want something like that, cool. I want to like completely level this plane, cool. And this is kind of like the free alternative to the other brush I'm going to use. Um, Not to say that I'll never use the planar brush, it does have its uses, but you can kind of see what it does. Like we we kind of put stuff in, knock it around, get some nice flat faces. Um, but the brush I am going to use is the Orb Flatten Edge brush. So you actually have to pay for this brush, but it's honestly not that expensive, and I'd suggest wholly just buying the pack because it's a godsend just for this brush alone. To be honest with you, and what it does is it's kind of like the planar brush, but it feels nicer. It feels a lot more controlled. It feels like you can get the results that you want a lot quicker. And this is kind of where the rock creation process takes a bit of a slow dive at this point. So we're at a higher resolution now. And what we kind of want to do is just reform a lot of our shapes. And it's okay as well to not have everything super clean and crisp, because if you ever download a Quixel Megascans rock or whatever, and use it as reference, which I do highly suggest people do, is like download scan data and review it and figure out what makes it look so good. Obviously, there's normal maps and textures that go over those things that make them look real. But when you're trying to represent something, especially as a sculpt, you kind of want to try and hit some of that stuff as close as you can. And just by getting the big forms right in general is going to do you a lot. Um, but also figuring out what details a rock has in it. Now, typically, if you work in games, right, a lot of the details will come through with textures on normals and shade and how your shader setup is. Maybe you got masks, but also like with nanite and stuff. We we're edging closer to a future where if you can sculpt it and put it in an engine, and there's a shader workflow for that, you might as well learn how to do it. Um, so you know doesn't hurt to learn how to make a good looking sculpt, is basically what I'm saying, rather than just kind of give up at the it kind of looks like a rock. So again, I'm seeing a lot of these like kind of lips and planes I put in earlier, and what I'm going to try and do is just either go back in here with the trim brush, just reform them a bit more. I keep saying reform, I mean refine. My English isn't that good despite being English, surprisingly. I just make rocks. So I'm going to cut this guy in a little bit more, just so we got some nice kind of shaping. So again, if there's an opportunity where I can take like an artistic interpretation on something, I'm going to take it. So if I have a super long line like this, it doesn't hurt to maybe just Maybe not like that, but maybe the top. Just refine that top angle a bit. Yeah, there we go. This is what we want. Some super nice stuff like this. And again, it's at this stage just getting in here and finding out what we want to do. So this is probably a good example of where the planar brush would shine. So if I just pull that guy out and go, you can kind of see what it's doing. It's kind of just doing a heavy cut through. And then when I rub this out, we're going to have this super nice line. I'm just going to take this plane again and just do some more cutting in. Cool. And I'm just going to back end that bit as well. Just so we keep that. And I'll probably just do the same here to a degree. Wash that out. Now we got some funky business going on here. What's that look like? You know what? That doesn't actually look too bad. So we're going to keep that and we're just going to hit the Dynamesh button again. And what I'm going to do now is just go and scrub in here and just mucky up this surface a bit, just so it's not super clean. So gonna wash, and just again break in some of this stuff, cut it down. Cool, 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 wonderful. And I'll go back into surfaces like this a bit later with the planar brush or the orb brush and just refine it a bit more. So what I'm actually doing is not what I should be doing. I should be going in and just all those medium shapes that I put in earlier, just go in, refine them a bit more, spinning around the rock, trying to find anything that looks a bit too soft and just scrub it up a bit. Again, I'm just going to do this with a little bit of speed. And again, if anything looks super low res like this, see if I can get away with it with the trim brush. If I can, great. If not, planar brush it will be. So that looks lovely. Love that. I'm not going to do the same type of thing too close because it might look a bit unorganic. So again, just going to go in here, keep adjusting the brush size. That is one thing I would suggest is when you're working around a rock or anything organic really is make sure you're spinning your brush size around. Like nothing in nature is ever the same size next to each other. Like everything takes different bumps and gets little bits of damage here and there or wears a bit differently in every place. So having the same brush everywhere is obviously going to make it look a bit too machined per se. So again, one thing that will help you sing when it comes to rock sculpture is just making sure you tighten up some of these angles where we have kind of gone a bit low res, and because all this is like super nice info, like we like stuff like this. It gives you a silhouette break on angle reads. It gives you lots of little like detail to run into masks or textures later. And I'm not going to do it everywhere though, because you do need some just rest lines, right? So one thing I'm noticing is this is kind of sharp, so which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's kind of a big layer. So I'm gonna knock it back a bit. Knock it back. One thing I really don't like is how this L shape. So planar brush to the rescue. That is polish. Planar brush to the rescue. And let's hope planar brush can come to the rescue. Oh, I'm just gonna take it with a pinch of salt at this point. Pull it down. No. Does this work for me? No, don't like that either. And this is what I mean. You kind of just want to do a bit of trial and error on some of this stuff and see what works and what doesn't work. And I don't think I'm getting the result I like here. So I'm not going to give up, never give up. I'm going to just go in here and manually work it with a trim brush, which was the backup option forever. And that's all good. I was just hoping the planar brush could have saved me. It did not save me. And if I hold Alt here and just, again, work this around, just going to tighten this up so it feels a bit more organic. So Scrub, scrub, scrub. It's just, have fun with this. Like when you're making rocks or anything in ZBrush, you know, there's obviously an end result somewhere, but we're not unwrapping. We're not UV unwrapping, so we can have fun. I don't believe anyone who tells me they enjoy UV unwrapping, even if they say it's therapeutic or tranquil. I think they're lying. We can see we've got some like super low res kind of artifacting coming here from our earlier Dynamesh. So again, going to be pretty heavy handed back here and just knock this about. I'm not too worried about being super clean at this stage. Like I said, so pew, 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 knock, knock, knock. Do hold alt, bring some of those layers back out. We love that. Some of those nice forms. Cool, cool, cool. Knock them back in, remesh. Now they're there. So we've got something that kind of looks like a rock, up to interpretation of whoever is viewing said rock. And what I'm going to do now is remesh, and this is where I'm going to pull out Orb's cheeky brush. And anything that you can kind of see I've chunked in with a square and the squares remaining. I'm just going to go in here and just budge that around. And at this stage, honestly, ideally you'd work on this for a bit longer and you'd make sure like your edges are super sharp and it's super polished up. So like if I go in here and, use this brush and maybe polish some bits, and I could, subdivide this a lot, high res it, if you imagine spending a few hours, or not hours, but a longer than I am doing right now on this stuff to make it a lot more refined, then you could have some super super crisp stuff going on. But what I'm going to do for the sake of the video length is just maybe say, hey, that's kind of good enough for now. I'm just going to polish up any horrendous issues like these big lines, like just, oh goodness, not that much. Just come in here and beat this about. Beat, beat, beat. Cool. And like all of this kind of layer and detail we've got is lovely, like especially when we've got planes that are fighting each other like this, like really try and like make sure they're pretty contrasty. So to tighten these up, I'm just using like the standard brush one way, the orb edge brush one way, and then I'm holding alt just to grab the plane on this and push it down, just so we have like a super nice crisp angle. And I'm just gonna go in and knock those edges back up. So we got some super nice stuff going on here. And again, where we get this, weird kind of cavity shape, it's the same type of principle with this brush. Is we go back in, hold alt, just push this right to the edge, just to clean that up and tighten that. Like you don't really have those crevices too much in the reference that I've seen. So, and we're still at a pretty low res, to be fair, when it comes to sculpting. We're at 165k points. So, what we could do is just, ram this up at this point. And you can kind of see, like, when I do that, everything becomes a bit more crisp, like all those kind of things. So in this case, what's probably better to do is just subdivide. You could zero mesh and subdivide. So let's do that. So I'm going to hit for same, zero mesh. We wait. Cool. And then I'm going to hit divide. And what you'll notice is actually all of our forms are now super soft, which isn't terrible, right? It's a matter of fact of, hey, I have a lot more topology now, so I can go in here and polish a lot of this stuff up, which is part of the process. So I'm going to do a section of this now, and you can kind of see how that goes. So polish some of this up. And you can either use like the orb edge brush, and you can even use the high polish brush as well, to do this mixture of alt and just normal brush, kind of polish some of these surfaces up. The main thing is just kind of get rid of this artifacting, really. But for the sake of this video, what I'm going to do now is we've got some topology, we've got some resolution rather. I'm going to go into our standard brush, and a good thing to do, especially if you're trying to push for like realistic rocks or just make super high poly rocks in general, is kind of just like, use the standard brush with alphas, and you can grab alphas off Megascans. If you downloaded the library, let me pull the screen across. So I've just pulled this granite one. And what we're going to do with this guy, so I've got the displacement map loaded, and if you just use the standard brush, right, pull up our alpha, import, and then just find your alpha. If and by the way, set it to drag rectangle. So if I bring this guy out now, we're going to get some super nice detail. You know, Obviously it depends on what your workflow is for said rocks to on how you want to go about this. And it's not cheating. Using alphas is a really strong workflow. But again, it lives and dies on the forms of your rocks. So make sure your rocks forms, like in this case, we've got a pretty interesting rock, like from all shapes. This looks a bit cartoony, but it's fine. And one thing I'm going to do is, especially working alphas, like there's a lot of detail. So I'm just going to up res again. So we're at like a silly poly count, right? Just so we can retain that detail. And the next thing I'm going to do is store a morph target. And storing morph targets is a super good habit to kind of get used to, especially when you're packing detail into an asset. Because what you're actually doing is you're saving a copy of that image that you can revert back to later. So I'll kind of give you an example of why this is useful now and just show you. So I've got it snapped to my toolbar, so store morph target button. So that's now saved how my rock looks. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start dragging some of this stuff out. And you can do this in a few different ways. You can just drag rectangle like I do. You could, lasso, pull something out like that. It completely depends. But for the case of this kind of video, I'm just going to pull a few all over the asset and not really worry too much about what's going on. I know I'm getting some stretching over the sides and stuff, but that's okay. And once you've done this type of stuff, you can, I'm spinning it around. I'm kind of doing a bit of everything. We'll stick a few on the bottom as well. So now I've got this, right? What we can do is, this is looking like a rock. And, with this, you can even increase the intensity and stuff if you want like a bit that's super kind of, you can also invert it and nudge it down and stuff. Like I noticed on the top of my rock, for example, there's quite a lot of undulation up here. So again, I'm not going to be too worried about what I'm overwriting or what I'm drawing over. I'm just going to kind of do some stuff. Maybe that's too much. But yeah, we're going to do something like that. Yeah, it looks about right. And now I'd never recommend actually just like saying, okay, this is done now. But what you can do is there's two things you can do with this really. So in the morph target menu, you can morph. So we can kind of go to and from where we were. So that's where we were. This is where we're at, and we can even double it down. I'm for the sake of this, I'm not really too bothered about having it super crisp, so I'm just going to nudge it back a bit anyway. And then what you can do is if you actually get the brush, morph target brush, which is when my brain can, there we go. You can actually work some of this stuff back if you wanted to. So again, probably square alpha, knock some of this back. Say you don't want any detail here's or wherever, you can kind of knock it back and stuff. That's something you can do. For the sake of this, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use the trim smooth border brush. Again, our Lord and Savior. And just go and clean up some of these faces and knock them back because you don't really want a super noisy rock unless you're trying to compete with scan data, and then, well, maybe. You just got to make sure your texturing method is bulletproof at that point. Again, I'm really just tapping. I'm not doing anything too crazy here. I've got the trims smooth border brush. I'm tapping. Anytime I get that kind of like hard line from the rectangle brush, I'm gonna just Control Z and pull it back. And this really will make this type of workflow will really just make your geology in general sing. Like your sculpts are going to look better. just not being afraid to harness the power of alphas to accelerate your workflow. Like no one's got time to, do this by hands. There is the surface noises in Zbrush, which can get you close, and I'll show you those in a second. And sometimes I do use them if I don't really have an alpha that I feel like works, and I can just do something with those. So I'm gonna just knock this, and I'm just gonna be pretty heavy-handed for the video's sake. But some of this stuff in, and we'll just work from one side of the rock for now. So we kind of got a rock like this at this point. It's looking like a rock. If you really want to kind of go in here and make it look super kind of organic and stuff, you can start to do some of the cracking and stuff. So for that, I don't know, you can either use Dam Standard, some of the slash brushes from Orb, just, some whatever the rock's saying in the reference. Oh, geez. But typically some rocks might just have some very weird kind of markings on them, like huge scratch lines down them and stuff. And that, those little imperfections and details is really what kind of like make a rock look like a rock. You could also just get alphas or make your own once and then drag it all over rocks. But at this point, it's kind of looking like a rock. I'll show you the surface noises before I kind of call it for now. And that is, so if you go into here, you can just pull out some of the lightbox ones. Honestly, half the pattern ones, I don't even give the time of day. I typically just use the ones that are kind of like cloud noise deformations. So this one, for example, is probably useful. Let's just run with this one. What's this one? Yeah, they're kind of both the same, right? But if we go here and edit, this is one thing about ZBrush that confuses me, is why it gives you a separate viewport that you can't move around. So here you can kind of see the imperfections that it's going to do. The only issue with this is like it does kind of inflate it out when you use it. So I'm just going to scale these up, and I'm going to just play with the curves here, because what essentially I did with the alpha, right, is just give a whole noise all over the asset, and that's kind of what I want to do with this. I'm just going to go and make sure some of those. Yeah, so that's cool. You can play with the strength here, so whether you're going to push it out or push it in. So for this case, we're probably going to just cut it in a bit. So cool. So it's going to look kind of like that, and you've got two options. You can mask by noise and then deform it however you want, whether that's by a brush or by inflate, for example, or you could just apply to mesh. Now, it probably didn't look like I did anything there because my strength was super low, but if I just ramp this up, for example, and then go apply to mesh, we now have some form of crazy alien meteorite. So but yeah, like the other option is you can do this. You could even keep it at that strength, to be fair, and then mask by noise, and then I don't know, brush clay buildup. Well, probably not brush clay buildup actually, because it's not going to work too well for this. But deformation, and then you inflate or whatever. This is my problem with this kind of stuff. Maybe I'm not doing it right, but I just feel like alphas work better personally. So I mean, that's kind of how you do a rock. Obviously, you probably want to spend a bit more time just polishing it all up to like final quality. Like now we're at a higher resolution, you can kind of see some of the edge and detail that I'm getting with the trim smooth border, and you would kind of want to, go in here and, really try and give some of this some flavor. But that would take, so it just takes time, realistically. And where you have some of these soft planes, you might just want to go in there again and, you probably want to do this before you put the alphas in, obviously. So on that note, I'm probably going to call this video. I hope it helps someone just to see me kind of talk or whatever, and sculpt some rocks. But let me know. But if you imagine this being like a huge boulder or something, or maybe it's a diddy rock, maybe it's a tiny rock. So there you go. That's the general principle of how I go go about making geology. Thanks.